Welcome to Carolina Sculpture Studio. My name is Clint Button and I'm a granite sculptor. Welcome to video number 64 of the virtual stone carving apprenticeship. Okay, I've done a little bit of work since the last video wrapped up. I added, most significantly, I added two longer outriggers, parallel to the ones on the jaw, on the mother, because they extend on one end but they don't on the other end. And I want to have these out. I screw them to it and I put braces between them so I can turn it, handling it with these. Now I'll probably still put a strap around this to hold the plaster once I cast it in place so it doesn't drop out when I flip it over. I wanted to be able to handle it without squeezing the mother as much, and so these should help out. Going around with some silicone, got my soapy water and just put some water in there that dried out. I'm gonna go around and patch this everywhere that I've been studying and looking to where I see gaps and holes and things that need to be touched up. I'm gonna put a piece of paper in this tear right here. I'll put silicone on the outside, put it in there, let it dry, and then I'll just trim it off with a pair of scissors. So I get a perfect fit, and after it's cured, then it should still open up really easy. You can do anything you want to this side of the rubber in terms of the mother, because this will just cause a difference in the register of this rubber against the plaster. And so whatever you put here, if you put a big contour or shape, it will cause it to show up in the casting. If you put it on the other side and to repair it, it'll cause it to not fit the mother properly, and that's a bigger problem. So, go around here and touch this all up, and we'll be back in a little bit. Couple silicone tips. If you let your silicone freeze, like you leave it out to where it can freeze, it's apt to ruin it. And you won't know any difference until you cover your clay or whatever, and then it never cures. It just never gets hard again. And I try to use up tubes completely, but sometimes there's a little bit left. And so what I do, try to get this light, I keep the tip when I open it. I cut that off, keep the tip. And I've got the things that screw in and the caps that screw on, and I try to wire them out on it. I've done all that different stuff. This seems to work better than anything. You take that tip and put it right back in the tube and press that bugger in there till it's completely in there. Like, with a tool or whatever. Just press it all the way in. And generally, that seems to work better than anything I've done. So you can take your finger and wipe your silicone around it, and that'll help keep it cured. But if your studio or wherever your storage area gets cold, you can't leave your silicone there if it's going to freeze. Because if you leave it there and it freezes and it really gets to it, it'll never cure. You'll put it on, you'll come back 3 days later, and it'll be all gooey. And which may not seem obvious, but if you mop this stuff on really heavy and put it on quick and then fill it with another layer, that little bit of skin the first one that didn't cure yet, if that's soft stuff that's gone by, it's been frozen, you'll try to pull that rubber off and it'll be ruined. So you want to know that at the beginning of your project, not at the end. Okay, back to work. Shave your soap, nice and thin. Good old Fell's naptha soap. I think we're just about at the point. I got all the repairs done on the rubber. Looks pretty good. Trimmed the patch I did up by the head, and I'm going to get this released. And I think the armature's all ready. Just have to mount it up overhead, but I'll have to do some work while this dries before we run the plaster, and then try to get this charged and get the casting done. It isn't necessary that you release it. It generally doesn't stick to the silicone, but this is what matters. And so I'd rather release it and not need it than wish I had. And even with my new fancy sink, I still like my old-fashioned indoor plumbing right here. Having a spray bottle, a big industrial one, works really well just to do it, but you can use just a dish soap bottle with a squirt. But to liquefy that, it gives you a little bit, you can add a little bit of time and really hit it just right so that you get your consistency so it spreads well, so it's not too foamy and it's not too thick and not too lumpy. There's a few little white flecks you'll notice on the clay, and those are pieces of naphtha soap that just didn't quite dissolve. They're not a big deal, but you know they're there. So we want to break this up as much as we can, but shaving it thin always helps. And it smells like I'm doing plaster, because this is how I've always done it. This is how I like my naphtha to be. I like to have this nice foamy, kind of thick, see it stays on the side, but it's not too solid, but it's all smooth. And what'll happen is you'll keep squirting water in, and it will dissolve those little chunks more and more. And the old soap that's in this can, because we just let it dry out from before, because there's no reason to waste it. And so we get this really nice foam that goes really well. And then you got enough foam you can see it, get your coverage, and then, like I've already got around her head, but just get your coverage and then go back over it and clean off the excess. And if you have any little lumps, pick them up. It's important to get it from both sides to make sure that you get all the faces, you get good coverage. Got it soaked up pretty good. Everything's covered pretty well. You can see where it's covered. A couple places, tears that I missed, so just put paper under them. Remember, this is a working model. This isn't perfection. We're going to use this once. We're going to stick it up on the wall, and we'll probably never use it again. We may look at it, but we'll probably never point this job again. So it only warrants so much work. And we could make it absolutely perfect, then it wouldn't be a working model. We wouldn't want to drill holes in it and change it, modify it if we need to. So let's wait for this stuff to dry up some before we put the armature in place and run some plaster. Getting this all set up, I'm going to put a dam around the edge of it just to square up the edge a little bit, give me a little more strength. I'm not going to try to reinforce the wings. I'll put some fiber in there and handle it carefully. It should be fine. So the only thing else I've got to do after screwing this dam up, and this is all just scraps from hanging on the wall, I use them over and over again for this, is I'll probably put 1 or 2 T-nuts in here to put eye screws on, to put eye bolts so I can pick it up, because T-nuts will hold them a lot better. I got my T-nut in the armature. Before I put it in, I'm putting a little bit of filament. Now, the only thing this is going to do is keep it from falling apart if it cracks. We don't need a big gob of this anywhere. We just want an overlapping matrix, and the goal is to put wet plaster in here and then reach in and kind of pull it up so it's not breaking the surface. We don't want to see any of this on the finished surface. The gesso may hide it, but it probably won't. But you don't need it to be any more than just present, because if it's thick, that's when it starts compromising what you're doing. You just want it so that if it cracks right here, there's a piece of fabric, a piece of filament right there to sort of keep it together. And same thing with up here on the wings. We don't want a tight bundle. We just want something across it so that if it does happen to fracture now or later or whatever, that we've got some filament there to keep the parts sorted together. because it's really hard to get the distribution after this is set in place. Then we'll work on hanging this up with the crane, making it all perfect. I can't really reach around the armature and get her head and her face fully charged, and you'll have a bubble on the lips and the nose of the chin quite often. So I'm going to run the first layer with just regular, just open without the armature, and then I'll set the armature down in and get everything where it needs to be. I've also set this up. I got a pretty good idea. We're probably going to use at least 2 bags for this. So I've run about 1.5 bags, and I've got 1, 2, 3 pre-measured batches. I'll charge this with water, run this in here, and then I can start, and then I've got 2 batches waiting that I can run really fast so I can stay and work this and really go with it. And the more you cast, the better your system will be. But with perfectly dry hands, it's a lot easier to measure out 2 or 3 batches, and I could blow through 3 batches here as fast as I can mix them. And if we need a 4th batch, because we had a little bit of a bag left, so we got almost 1 batch out of the previous bag. This bag is mostly down, and we'll probably have to break into the next bag. But this will get us started and running really well. So let's make some plaster. Getting the face and everything fully charged. Getting a little bit on these walls, because you're going to have to fill that whole thing and make sure that it's full. When you do a full round job, the old way to do it is you tie the pieces of the mold together, and then you literally just tumble it all over the place. And it's kind of crazy. I mean, it works, but you got to be careful, and if it's really big, it's really awkward, and you really got to have some people that know what they're doing to help you out, because doing it as a one-man job is, once it gets a certain size, is less than ideal. But as this starts to cream up and thicken, you can lift the fiber up, make sure things are overlapped. Just go all over it. And I really like the way that having to cast something makes you think about the overall shape and undercuts and things like that, because when you just carve stone, you really don't have to think beyond a certain point. And when you do this, this provides you a way to see what you're producing in 3 different medium that handle light in different ways. And it helps everything that you do. There's not an easy way to explain it, but you'll end up seeing it multiple ways that you wouldn't see it otherwise. And it's nothing but a benefit. And the thicker it gets, the better it grabs. And this in the middle isn't as critical, and you can wait. You don't have to put it in there. You put it in after you dip this layer down, but I'd like to have it registered right from the front and get it really well in there and lift it up. Like I said, working model, okay? This isn't a finished model, this is a working model. We need this to work. We don't need this to be bling pretty. We need this to have all the information in order to transfer it, capture it, transfer it onto the job. If we've got all that, then it's a fantastic model. people look at it and they don't understand that because they think it should just look pretty, then they're not going to be able to do this kind of work. They don't get it. We're not trying to please that audience because this is just part of the process that most of them wouldn't understand is even involved in the first place. Getting down towards the end. I run about 2 bags on this. I've got the second bag almost finished, so I'll probably just mix up another about 1.5 buckets is what it looks like, just to reinforce it. It'll make it kind of heavy, but if it breaks, because we went cheap on the plaster, that's a big fail. I still got to make sure I've got build all on this edge. Everything else is built pretty well. Looks like I got her head completely full. The plinth looks pretty good. You sort of have to dam up the corners as the plaster sets so that you can get your depth that you want. And put some of the chaff and debris in the corner. Use your bench knife or ink knife or putty knife or whatever you've got to scrape up some of the spatter that's gone on before it's completely cured. And you can dam up an awful lot of stuff, and then you can build it really well. But we've got the plinth. The wooden part the armature doesn't make any difference. You know, even if she doesn't stand up perfectly straight on the armature, doesn't matter, it's a working model. We wanted to capture the plinth, so we had a reference for that 4-foot measurement from there to the top of her head. That's one reason I went ahead and squared it up around her head, because I'll square that off so that it's easy for me to put a nail in at the top of the stone. And it's a little tall, it's above the wings. The wings were right at the 4-foot mark, tip of the wings and the tip of her head. But the stone's going to be a little bit bigger, so we just have to be able to put it together. I'll show you. We'll get this on the with compasses and stuff, and you can adjust and fiddle things, because usually what we have is we'll have a model just an arbitrary model, say maybe 2 feet tall, and somebody wants something that's going to be 3'1" for whatever reason, just because that's what the architect or the designer or the family thought would look perfect. And they didn't ask me, they just want something that's that big. And they've already sold it. So it's up to me to make it fit. And so that's the benefit of the compasses, is that you can, and the triangle, is that you're not constrained to a perfect, either a perfect factor like a whole number, you know, 2 or 3 or 4, or a pointing machine, which, you know, those things are all great, but you're going to end up having a bunch of models. Most of the models that I've pointed with compasses were an approximation of what they wanted, and we used that as the basis to have proper proportions and figure development and placement and all that stuff. And then we did the ornamentation and any accessories and that. Those were just ad-libbed, or maybe we did a specific model for those, but it was faster because we already had something in inventory, so we didn't have to go through and create a great big thing. You know, most studios, the old studios, would have maybe a few DePrado models, big life size, you know, or whatever, you know, 4 or 5 or 6 foot casts, and then you'd use those with compasses because you just would modify them as you needed to. And you didn't use that exact design, everything, whatever it was. That wasn't what you normally did. You just made it work. So that's the cool thing about compasses. So we'll run a little more plaster on this. It's almost done. And hopefully tomorrow we can peel it. Oh, it'll look great. You will find that this flat back bucket, this bucket with a flat side on it, will set right up against the work, which is a lot handier than you'd think. You don't usually think about that because you usually don't have a flat bucket. And because this one has that flat back, it's fantastic. I mean, I didn't really think about that when I found the bucket, and when I started using it, I really realized how great of a option or accessory, whatever that is. It's a really good feature. Here towards the end, you can get up on things and do a little bit more because it's a little more sturdy. And you just have to wait for it to kick. But there's certain things you want to do when it's really wet. And if you've dammed everything up, you can get really good fill. Because this is the last bucket. There's a little bit of the bag left. I'm just going to wrap it up. I don't think we need to run another half bucket just because. We may, but I doubt it. It's they've got pretty good build. You can go around on your dam on the side, do like a 1-inch line or a 1/2-inch line so you can see where you are. It'll help you gauge it if you're not used to seeing it. But I didn't do that on these. Scrape up all your drips off the table, throw them in. It's all reinforcement. You might just as well reinforce it as throw it away. I had just half of a batch left in the bag, so I went ahead and do it. Now, if you're smart, you'll make sure that this thing will come off before you quit for the night, because we're fixing to wrap this up for the day. And while this hydrocal still has a little bit of moisture in it, it's a lot easier to get stuff loose. So if you can release these to some extent, you'll be glad you did. Once they cure up. So I'll take all those off here in just a minute and we'll run this last bunch of plaster out. Put all this debris right in there and it'll build. Okay, in real time that took about 2 hours to cast that. So much time I spent. And I spent that in 2 hours because I ran 2 full bags of hydrocal. And I was able to do that because I had everything organized. Had everything planned out, had everything in place. I didn't have to go get something. And I understand that everybody watching probably doesn't have everything I've got just sitting here. But I really want you to think about it. I'm showing you what I do. Now I'm going to go around and I'm going to trim this off just to square this edge up a little bit. And I'm going to spend my time and scrape all my table off so my table's nice and clean. So when I come back, it's not stuck on so hard I can't ever get it off. Because that will go back in the shed with the other bats. The reason I like this scraper with the 90-degree end is I can drag it. This ends up being 1 inch to 1.25 inches thick, which for hydrocal, it should be just fine. Soften it up a little bit. But doing this after it cures completely, it's really hard. the hydrocal gets really hard, don't pull to the corners. Go to the corner and push your way in so you don't pop a corner off. Give it a chance to cure. This will be crazy hard tomorrow. And in a few days it'll be even better. But by putting the border on like I did, the dam, that provides a double benefit. It helps keep the hydrocal. It's easier to get a build, you know, to make it tall, but it also gives me a chance to isolate the hydrocal mother from the hydrocal cast or positive, because I really don't want them to knit, because that's just going to make it more difficult to get them apart. So tomorrow what we'll do is probably put a piece of something, plywood or whatever, see what I've got easy over this, and put some straps, and we'll just flip it over, take it apart. Okay, this has had a chance to cure overnight and dry up. I've got it rigged, got it hung on one hoist, hung on the other hoist. I'm going to turn it into belts using a small chain fall. That doesn't have to really support any weight. This weighs, you know, maybe 300 pounds. And so that should be fine because it's not supporting it, it's just pulling it to pull it over. One thing, I did go ahead and put a couple of straps on with boards to go the whole length to support it a little bit better as it turns. But what I've got to remember turning this is that right now, it's only, from the center line of this, is only this far off the deck. I'm going to have to probably go up with it some. But from here to this center line is a lot. So once I get it up on its side, I'm going to have to rework it so that I can stabilize it, so I can turn it, because otherwise it's going to turn, it's going to be so deep, it'll end up hitting the table. So you got to think about that when you're turning things, not just flip them over, because the center of gravity isn't where I've got it loaded. That's just where I can work with, so I'll have to rework it. But we'll start doing this. I won't bore you with the details. It's pretty straightforward. Just have to go slow and careful, turn it over. Be back in a minute. It's important when you take your mother apart, to take it apart in order. Don't just take everything on one side off and then everything on the other side off. Take it off the way you built it. Go in stages. If this is important, like you're going to cast a bunch of stuff, like we did a really good mother, take your Sharpie or whatever and number all your intersections. You know, 1, 2, 3, ABC, whatever, so that everything goes together the way it came apart, so you can put these aside and not wonder, well, I don't know where that went. This is, you know, hopefully it's a good model. I don't have cast again, so I don't really care. But if you're doing it, make sure that, you know, what you do fits what you need, and take it apart in the right order. So. And I usually don't mix my used screws with my new screws, just because sometimes you'll have stuff that slips or runs or whatever, and you'd rather not use buggered screws. And if they're buggered, throw them out. You're not going to save anything by ruining bits or having something that you can't take apart. right, now we'll start doing the rubber. Do the entire edge first. Make sure it releases all the way around before you start just pulling it off, because you'll end up having somewheres that hangs up, and you don't want that. Get locked a little bit here at the bottom. And then you can start removing it. And seeing if you did it right or not. And it looks like her face is good. It's going to be a winner. Oh, damn. Check that out. All right, folks. Get the camera. Looks pretty great. There's a little gap right there, but I'm not seeing any filament on the surface. I'm not seeing any loss of consequence. We got all of her face detail. Now, we'll look at this more later. Looking at her pure white versus looking at her in a matte white versus a glossy gray, whatever color you want to call this, plastilina, is a huge impact on how you'll understand your shapes and everything. But got a little bit of clay right there on her forehead to clean off, but I'll gesso her up with just some white gesso to seal her, and we'll be all set. Clay model, rubber mold, mother for the rubber mold, and a working model. That's how you do it in a professional granite studio. All right, we're one step close to starting carving. Now we gotta start working on the base. My name's Clint Button. I'm a granite sculptor here at Carolina Sculpture Studio, showing you how to do things nobody else is teaching you how to do in a real working environment as part of the virtual stone carving apprenticeship. Thanks for coming in.